Let us officially begin, you guys, now that it is 9:05 and I start my stopwatch that I have right here. Let us begin with casting power. My man, and it's just right on time. Jose is right there, bingo bango, for the beginning of this. So one of the reasons why, now about half of you in this room know me. Some of you, a couple of you guys know me really well. The rest of you don't. And this is why I spend time always with a certain degree of philosophy, psychology, and perspective when I talk about the business. And the reason for that is because this is just not an objective profession. It is a subjective profession, and I know we know that. And from the time we're little bitty babies, right, depending on, and when I say little babies, that could be 52. I don't care. I mean that more from the inception point when our brain starts thinking about doing all the steps to be an actor available for job interviews, known as auditions, to working. That's what I mean by little babies, right? All of us have been there. We've all been there. And we are told right off the bat, agent, casting, pictures, class, job. There you go. And we are not told about the other folks. So it's important today that I spend a little bit of time on the nebulous, subjective, not math and science, but pretty close subject of the power of casting directors. And it's important that we understand this from an intrinsic standpoint, because I think that we give too much thought to what their position is and too much power to what their position is, and yet at the same time understanding that they have massive amounts of power. It's just a matter of how you parse it, okay? So yes, it doesn't matter the field. It doesn't, or as I call it, the area of industry in our profession, right? It doesn't matter what you're auditioning for. It doesn't matter if you're a casting person for live theater, all the way up into inclusive of Broadway and globally. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're casting for commercials. It doesn't matter if you're casting for feature films, modified low budget films, studio films, or episodic television. Globally, it doesn't make any difference. Every single person who's in casting has 2 or 3 main jobs. And one of those main jobs is they have to listen to their employers. Remember, casting directors, 98.5% of the time, are not regularly salaried employees. Some of them are at networks. Some of them are. Some people like DreamWorks or Spielberg would have somebody who is perhaps under a contract. But for the most part, they are viewed as independent contractors. What's up, Mickey? Good to see you, my dear. They're independent contractors. So realize that we know they are the middleman between us and the folks who write their check and our check. So the first note that I want to make, that I want us all to understand, is they're beholden to their employer first. They're not beholden to representatives or to us as individuals. They're beholden to what their boss is. And one of the things about their power is to understand a casting person's number one power, which I'm sure many, because again, we're human beings, I'm sure many of them have found some sort of emotional or egotistical element of, but the biggest power that they have is to not call you in. Yet, from our chair, what we need to do as actors is we need to not view that as us against them. That doesn't help you, guys. It's not the inability to call you in. It's just they have a limitation. Now, it doesn't matter. Again, I'm going to continue to not stay in pandemic mode. I know this is being recorded as we're slowly coming out of a 2-year nightmare on the planet regarding SARS-CoV-2. But whether it's self-tapes and how many of them they actually watch, that's watching them. I'm talking about how many they request. Okay, we can't get in this conversation about what they do or don't watch. Even if they only request 50, I can promise you, as a guest star, recurring, or series regular actor, I can guarantee you they would never see 50 guest stars in Los Angeles. They might see 8 to 12. So yes, the numbers have increased because of self-tape, but again, we don't know how many they're watching. But point number one about casting power is to understand they are, by definition of their job, limited on how many people they can see, how many interviews they can provide. And that is one of their number one power. But right in behind that, whether you want to call it 1A or 2, doesn't matter to me, they have an agenda list from their employer. And depending on, again, this is part of the challenge, whether it's a commercial, just understand what I'm saying philosophy-wise. They have a list, certainly in film and television, they have an offer-only list, they have an avail list check they have to do for stars and names and stuff and blah, and then they get down to the rest of whatever the breakdown is. And it is not uncommon for feature film directors and or showrunners or TV producers, or certainly even in commercials, the client themselves or the ad agency or the director of the production company. It's not uncommon for those folks to have some people they'd like to give consideration to. So the casting folks have no choice because, again, they're HR, y'all. They're human resources. They have no choice but to call those people in. And those people take up spots. And so one of the main power that a casting office has isn't even almost a power. It is an intrinsic, inherent limitation in the amount of time for the number of job interviews they can have. And so when you don't know somebody that's outside of the person in casting, and I can promise you guys, I know a lot of casting directors, even when you do know them, you don't necessarily get an audition for every single thing they're doing because they don't feel that you're right for it. That's life. I mean, you can know 50, 60 casting directors well, like I do. Doesn't mean you get read for every single thing they do. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't. Even in commercials, it just doesn't happen. Now, in the olden days, when we didn't do digital auditions, I know we call them self-tapes, but to me they're digital auditions, you would have a pre-read and then you would have a straight to producers. Now, some of that has gotten muddied and clouded during the pandemic because of self-tape. We don't have, at least for guest stars, we don't have what we would call callbacks anymore. Our auditions are basically, they're going to cast directly from one audition that we would have called in the olden in-person days a straight to. Commercials, I know for a fact, they absolutely still do what would be known as a first audition or a pre-read, and then they have callbacks commercially because they have to have the client and the ad agency in the room with the director at that point to actually book something. So again, these are all mechanisms that the casting people just have to go through. It's not a matter of whether or not you limit or give them too much power. It just simply is what their job description becomes. And again, Sheeta, increasing the possibility of getting auditions is just the process of having casting people be aware of you and the process of building your resume, having a demo reel, and again, being right for something. It's a concatenation of factors that will come into whether your representative can get you in or whether you get yourself in. Again, I always remind folks, I did 14 student films, and back in the day, the modified agreements we have today were just called limited exhibition and SAG experimental. I did all that shit. I did all that shit to build a resume. And commercials, you do the same thing. You work to get meetings with commercial representatives, and you hope somebody liked your face and liked your personality and chooses to represent you, and away you go. But in terms of casting power, there's no doubt that item number 2, so that was item number 1. Item number 2 comes down to what a legitimate casting person's history is, just like it is for you. Just like your resume, they have a resume. This is why it's so important, you guys. To me, it's so important that you just don't keep looking at your profession as auditions. No, you have to break them up by area of industry. Guys, there's a reason why area of industry is something I invented as a language and why it's a chapter in my book. Because the audition choices, the casting power, how that goes is not the same for feature films, studio feature films, as it is for legitimate television versus, it's not the same. These people are not charged with the same limitation of their power. You have to realize you've got to start thinking about, because a lot of modified films, guys, the director is the casting director. The casting director is somebody's girlfriend or husband or something. That's not diminishing it, but they're not a regular, professional, ongoing for life casting director. But when you are talking about somebody who has a long career, especially in commercials like a Ross Lacey or a Michael Sanford or an Allison Horn or any of those people, their resume denotes a lot of their power, as we call it. This conversation is about how we talk about power, okay? So yes, there's no question, just as it would be with you. If a casting director has had a commercial casting director has had a client, let's say McDonald's, just make some shit up, and they've been casting McDonald's commercials for 10 years, well, yeah, they probably get a little bit more of a voice in that room. Understand that like a theatrical casting office like an Ulrich Dawson Kritzer, for example, since I've known them since '88, no shit. They do 5, 6, 7, 8 or so shows, TV shows, every single year. And they've been doing that for 20 plus years. Many of the people that hire them over and over again are the same network and the same producer or showrunner. So while I would sit here and tell you on its face, theatrically for film and television, the casting directors don't have any power, zero, with regards to who gets cast. And I'm going to make that statement as item number 2, and then I'm going to follow it up with item number 2A, which is except when they do. And we don't know when they do. I do know for a fact that if you get towards the end of a season, let's pick a couple of shows right now that have been on the air for a long time, The Walking Dead and Grey's Anatomy, let's just pick those two. Do you think that the casting director, Bialy Thomas, whoever it may be, who's been casting that show for 5 or 6 or 7 seasons, do you think honestly and legitimately that if there's a co-star role that's being cast out of Atlanta and somebody's read for them 6 or 7 times and the casting people really like them and it's only 2 lines and it's brief, yeah, I can guarantee you that if they really want to see somebody get a job at that point, they might say to their producers, you know, if it doesn't really matter to you guys that much, why don't we just cast Billy? Why don't we cast Mary? Yes, that does happen. Absolutely. 100%. It just doesn't happen very often. That's all. I mean, when it comes to series regulars, their job is to line up people who are available, and they'll have no say in who gets, and they don't have a ton of say in most guest stars. I can tell you right now, guys, I have read for shows. No shit. This is not a joke. This has happened 5 times, 6 times. 6 times in the last 2 years, in which I have read for shows that I know the executive producer and the showrunner, both of them. Neither one of those shows are on my resume yet, and one of them never will be because the show is gone, and the other show is about to go bye-bye. That's how much has changed in television in terms of how much the other producers and also the network now actually help control the weekly casting in television. It's just the way it is. So when I know the executive producer and the showrunner, and I do a good job, and they tell me so, just keep doing what you're doing, and I can't get hired, then where does that leave the casting director in terms of the power of getting hired? They don't. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we should not be running around. People should not be running around believing. This is what I'm concerned about. I'm always concerned about this, guys. I literally have pictures when I speak of me doing this all the time. It's how we think about this profession that causes us to feel rejected, causes us to get depressed. I'm not talking about basic frustration with the profession, but that's a given, y'all. This is a difficult profession. You are doing well if you book 7 out of 100 auditions. You're kicking ass. So if by definition kicking ass is you don't get hired 93% of the time, hello, McFly, that's this profession. So don't put it all on the casting director, man. I say it all the time that what you want is you want to have enough people in this profession, in the position of casting, who are at least willing to try and consider to get you in the room when something comes by that you're right for. That's what you're working for, and that's all. Okay? That's because in the room, like I said, I use in the room. It's the only chapter in this book that I ever wind up discussing the actual craft and the show part of show business, of what happens in that room, or as it is for us now, on camera from our house. And some in-person auditions are coming back in Los Angeles. As a matter of fact, Union Working, the grassroots group I'm in, has a clubhouse at 10 o'clock today. So if you're bored and just can listen to something with your phone on, listen to the conversation about in-person auditions coming back and masks and such, because that happens at 10 o'clock today. But just understand that in the room, the scenario I gave you just now, that I called 2A about, a casting director that has a long relationship with a production company in the same network, will they sometimes have some influence on people getting hired? Sure, some, absolutely. Most of their influence resides in who doesn't come in the room. And when I say that, that's not, be clear, that's not something where people sit around and go, oh, hell no. No, it's just a matter of limitation. Casting people will get into the place as you would in business. Item number 4 in this conversation, where they owe representatives favors. There are representatives, agents, or managers whose clients have done them a solid or whatever it may be. You have all that stuff. You have personal requests from producers and directors, girlfriends, wives, sisters, daughters, cousins. Guys, this is normal. This happens in life everywhere, and everyone always wants to make it out to be just only done in show business, and that's not true. Favors happen in every single industry, and casting's stuck in the middle. And they're being pulled at 2 different directions. They're being pulled by their employers, they're being pulled by representatives, and then there's us. And we're third on that short list. So it's much more about perspective, which is so much of what I talk about, because we simply are not provided with in every single step along the way in this profession. We are not provided with, in my opinion, remotely close to the proper perspective about everything that affects our ability to have a shot at a job and then also get a job. And I need to address item number 5 that has to do with casting power. And the reason I have to is because, again, I'm sharing with you because I don't know whoever is going to see this IG Live for as long as it's going to live on my grid. And I'm going to say it again. Eventually, guys, I will pull these off my IG grid. As I said at the beginning, I trim down the first 4 to 8 minutes when I'm just sitting here waiting for folks to come in the room. But eventually, they're not going to be on my IG grid. They're just going to be over on the YouTube channel. But I say this globally because of this. There is this old phrase, it's an old idiom, to use the proper word, of "you'll never work in this town again." The Black Book, man. Have y'all all seen the Black Book Registry by casting directors? Holy shitballs. It's like the Holy Grail. It sits on a mountaintop above Mulholland Drive in the Hollywood Hills, and it has every actor that's ever lived in it and everything they've ever done wrong, and we'll never see them again. Ha ha. It doesn't exist, y'all. Okay, that should have been funnier. Somebody should have commented on that shit. Okay, I promise you, I've been doing this long enough. It doesn't exist. Okay? Does that mean that casting directors don't have friends that are also casting directors? No, but not as much as you might think. Even not in pandemic times, you'd be surprised how much casting people never hang out with one another, or might see them once a year at the CSA Awards or some shit. One of the things that happened at the Actors Network a lot was when we had our holiday parties, and some of the people here know this, some of the casting people and agents loved coming because, number one, they knew they weren't going to be bothered by actors inappropriately because I ran the Actors Network. And number two, they loved being able to put a face with a name. Hey. Good to see you, Anatoly. They loved finally meeting somebody in person because they never meet each other. So the idea, the belief that from a casting power standpoint, that the casting community at large as a whole, globally, is sitting around trying to find a way to tediously codify into some massive book somewhere every misstep that every actor's ever made, and that's even aside from being good or not good. That's aside from being talented in a room. Yes, you want to make sure that a casting director never calls you in again? Have a shitty audition. Yeah, that's your feedback, for sure. I'm even going to do an entire IG Live on just feedback. But that's what's going to be more the reason why a casting director doesn't ever call you in again, because they just didn't feel that your skill set was up to snuff at that time. And yes, there is no question, and I personally can speak to this, and I will, that yes, there's a black book that each person has in their life because you have one. Come on, man. We all know by the time you're 25, man, you've been involved with enough parties that you threw or somebody else threw or that a buddy threw, and you had a conversation about who you'd invite, and somebody's name come up, and everybody, like 1, 2, 3, 4 of you looked at each other and went, no. There's always somebody who doesn't get invited to the party because of some shit they did in the past. So if you think that doesn't apply to this professional community, of course it does. Because we're human, man. We're human beings. But the idea that when that occurs, when someone, and I could name 3 or 4, and that's not true. I could probably name 1 or 2 that are still active in this business for some things that occurred way back at the beginning of my career, and those people just chose to never consider me again as an actor. It's not a joke. 33 years ago, they still don't. They'll never call me in. I could be the last white guy male actor on the history of the planet. They'd never audition me. That's a true statement in this casting power conversation. And they have the power to not see me. Now, if I know their boss well enough, their boss can say, no, you have to see him. And then they would. They wouldn't like it, but they would have to because they're their employer. But if you think that personal discord, problems and trials and tribulations don't affect a human being who has the power to not see you, if you don't have the power to override him or her, and that will keep you from getting in the room, you're wrong, because it's absolutely the case. Sometimes it's not just all about your resume or your talent or your demo reel. Yes, people can have personal and hold personal grudges or vendettas. And if you don't have the ability to go around them, they have the ability to never see you. I knew a gal very briefly way back in the day who was a huge casting director at a huge production company in the early 90s. I don't need to name names, it's not important. And one of my buddies, I had helped get a job at an agency, and he became friends with her, and we all went out one night, and no joke, she got so drunk she threw up in the car. It's not a joke. I'm telling you a true story. It's a true story from Kevin's life and career. And I'm not kidding you. This is not a joke. Because she got sick in the car, and out of the people who were in the car, I was the only actor, the other folks weren't, she was so embarrassed, she never would call me in again. Not because I did anything, because I was present when she threw up. And she was too embarrassed. I found this out through my friend. She was too embarrassed to see me in an audition because she got sick in the car. You guys just sit with that for a minute when you start thinking about casting power. Okay? It's one of the reasons why, and these are part of the things I learned, and this is why it's important to listen to what I'm saying after all these years. This is one of the reasons why I learned that I wanted to create professional associations and build a spider web. All of these are conversations that are coming up. But I learned not to get too friendly with people anymore, because I did that in the first 3 or 4 years I lived in Los Angeles. And I got burned by a lot of it. Not in a bad way, not purposefully. It just is what it is. I couldn't correct that for her. I couldn't do anything about it. Shit happens. But what you do have to do is you have to learn from it. So Kevin learned, okay, well, I should probably, relationships are key, Will. I should probably make sure I don't put myself in that position again. So just understand that's what happens, you guys. And so it's a real key to understand the limitations, but start with the fact, as I wrap this up with number 6, that casting directors are human beings. And we both either deify them too much, but we also don't consider the normal the frailties of simply being human. They're human, man, and they play a very important middleman in this construct known as trying to work as an actor in any city on the planet, everywhere. Hey, Kimberly, it's nice to see you. I'm a few minutes away from wrapping up, but glad you came in. That's Miss Nashville's in the house, from my hometown, Nashville, her too. So just understand that. It's the last thing I'm saying, but it's the first thing I want you guys to consider is casting directors are human beings. They're just as susceptible to getting their ego in the way as you are. They're just as susceptible to being embarrassed by something and then not wanting to engage with you as you are. And they're also required, they're unequivocally required, hey Rennie, a few minutes left, they're also required to listen to their boss. The person that writes their check tells them what they're going to do. And anything outside of that they have a little bit of wiggle room about, they will do. And so that's all you have to understand. But to believe that casting has most of the power in casting is simply foolish. They don't. There's too much money at stake. They may have had a little more power way back in the day. It's okay, Rennie, it will always be on the grid. And then eventually it will be on the YouTube channel. And one day it'll only be on the YouTube channel. But just understand that their power is very limited. And that's why it's important to understand perspective-wise. As I wrap up, casting power is about perspective. You need to have as many casting people, casting associates, and casting assistants globally like you, and be willing to consider you based on your skill set and your talent and your personality as you possibly can. You need to have a representative who also works hard to build casting contacts and keep those contacts live and maintenance free and solid. You have to. Thanks, Comic Cole. You have to. But that does not mean that that's going to always equal you getting opportunities, because there's a good 10 to 15 reasons why it doesn't. And the belief that you can go in and kick ass at an audition and that you should, that's the word I hear actors use all the time, well, I should have booked that. Dude, I got 3+ decades to tell you all the jobs I should have booked. Some of the best auditions I ever gave, I didn't get hired for. So as I finish this, just understand, I read for Quentin Tarantino and Lawrence Bender for Reservoir Dogs twice. Not once, twice. For the role that you all, if you saw the movie, eventually you would see was they gave the role to Chris Penn. Well, that's weird. His last name is Penn. His brother's Sean, and his dad was also Leo Penn, who was a longtime television director. That's a production trying to help make sure they make money by adding a name to their cast. So you can get pissed off about this stuff, or you can recognize that the fact that that casting director actually chose to see me to begin with for that film, and then that I got read for it twice, brother, that's the position we're in as actors. And you have to accept and understand that and have the proper perspective about it. Okay, that's going to wrap up Casting Power. Again, it will be on the grid. You can go back and watch it there. Just understand you can fast forward through the first 6 or 7 minutes because I'm just waiting for people to get in the room. The trimmed down 1080 version is on the YouTube channel, The Kevin E. And I'm going to remind everybody today, number 1, have a great weekend. Number 2, next week is the first week in which I need to skip sessions. I'm going to have to miss Monday because of emceeing an event and Friday because I'm out of town. So next week on 3/23 Wednesday will be the only live show next week. Y'all be beautiful. Jose, don't shoot nobody. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I will see y'all soon. Peace. Oh, Cassandra, I'm so sorry. I'm just now signing off, love, but go watch it on IG Live, okay? I'm sorry you missed it, Cassandra. But lock and load. Y'all have a great weekend. Okay. Later.